Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Hersey Hoops' latest original podcast production, The Network, Season 2, which features interviews with Hersey basketball alums across a variety of careers and majors to highlight the connection between interscholastic athletics and career achievement. We hope the network can serve as a bridge between our alumni's experience in high school basketball with that of their professional successes. The network podcast today is brought to you by the Happiness Project, developed and founded by 2019 Hersey grad Jake Lavin. After a fellow student committed suicide and having had multiple friends with depression and anxiety, Lavin thought enough was enough, so he used the Happiness Project to help out in any way possible. From there, the Happiness Project was born, and their goal is to spread love and happiness through clothing alone. The Happiness Project now has over 61,000 followers on Instagram. Visit happinessmerch.com to purchase your items, and 15% of the profits go towards mental health research. Last, subscribe to Hersey Hoops on Twitter, Instagram, or SoundCloud, Spotify, or YouTube for live episodes of the network. It is an absolute honor to welcome our 9th overall guest in the second of Season 2 of the network, Hersey High School Distinguished Alumnus Dr. Chris Nowinski, class of 96, currently one of the foremost concussion researchers on planet Earth, and is an accomplished author, former professional wrestler, and current CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, as well as a co-founder of the Boston University CTE Center. Not to mention a lowly Harvard grad, also with a PhD in behavioral neuroscience from Boston University, and the youngest hardcore champion in WWE history. Dr. Nowinski, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us during this holiday season for you.
My pleasure, Coach Scott. It's great to meet you.
Absolutely. So we'll jump right into it. First of all, your resume regarding athletic accomplishments as well as research-based advocacy speaks for itself. You've been published in SI, appeared on 60 Minutes, authored the book Head Games, Football's Concussion Crisis in 2006 to widespread acclaim, and have earned a PhD in behavioral neuroscience. Not the easiest major, I'm sure. So did you have a particular ignition moment that signaled to you that head trauma and its resounding effects was going to be your life's work? Or was it kind of a progressive series of events that developed your nuanced passion in this field?
So I had one sort of light bulb moment, and it was 2003. I was wrestling for WWE. I kicked in the head and had a bad concussion, but didn't appreciate what a concussion even was. And so despite the fact that my head was throbbing and I felt nauseous and I couldn't remember things, I kept wrestling for 5 weeks. And I had to retire or stop that only because I developed a sleep disorder, which scared the heck out of me. I met a doctor named Robert Cantu, who was the 8th doctor that I saw trying to put me back together so I could get back to work. And he, in one meeting, changed everything I thought I knew about concussions. I walked in thinking I'd never had a concussion in my life because I'd never had one diagnosed. They said, well, I know you don't think you've had one diagnosed, but you ever been hit in the head and you saw stars, or you were dizzy, or confused, or you had double vision, or you couldn't remember the place? And I was like, well, yeah, that happens all the time. That's called a good hit. And he goes, well, those are concussions. Let's try to piece it together. And it was really easy for me to rattle off 6 I'd had in the previous 4 years that were significant enough for me to remember.
Right.
And he said, okay, well, what you're going through might be the accumulation of all these hits, plus not taking any time off because you're supposed to rest your brain. And there might be some downstream problems from this. And I was like, what? I'm like, I've been bashing my head for 18 years and no one's ever told me this stuff. I never knew I was supposed to tell you when I was blacking out or couldn't remember stuff. And so that was my moment where I was like, God, it's a shame I threw my career away out of ignorance. And it would be really great if we could change the attitudes of athletes and change the culture so that other people don't throw their career away. And even going back, I remember Hal Helmer was the athletic trainer at Hersey. And we actually lost a young man named Kurt Dyreen to second impact syndrome because he played with a concussion. And even that story, which was told, never clicked with me, right? And so again, all athletes were playing through concussions. And so I thought, let's try to change the world. It started with a book and then the foundation, but I never really thought I'd lead this and be my life's work. The book was sort of my penance for taking my Harvard degree and going into pro wrestling and damaging my brain. And like, all right, here, don't, we'll fix this. But I learned along the way that no one really had the passion that I did to create this change. I always thought someone would come in and take it over, some doctor. And I just care more than other folks, I guess. And so I'm just stuck with it.
I think unfortunately too, this awakening in the area of brain research, often for pro athletes, specifically from the NFL or the NHL, comes too late. And when you look at, I remember, I don't know if it was on Outside the Lines or 60 Minutes, when it did the documentary on how the '85 Bears have kind of.
Yeah, ESPN 30 for 30.
Yes, yeah. Yes, and it's like, you see McMahon, and he's like, he can't walk into a room and remember why he came and things like this. And, unfortunately now there's not much to really do when you're 55, 60 years old. When you start to fully realize, the side effects of head trauma in professional sports or in college sports even too. Okay, excellent answer. So many of our teenage or current student listeners may not remember Tough Enough and how great that show was, or your career in the WWE as Chris Harvard. Two separate questions on that front. First off, how did your sociology background help you in developing your in-the-ring persona, or is that something that's pushed a little bit more so by the WWE? And also kind of explain in details the rigors of training for the WWE Division I football on your body with specific regards to traumatic head injuries.
So the character in the Chris Harvard was really created by me. It started on independent circuits, and I just kept sort of refining this idea. The idea was the experience I had when I went to Harvard. So
the Letterman's jacket that came with it is real, correct?
The Letterman jacket I had to get made because Letterman jackets are a high school thing, but the average public doesn't necessarily know that. And a Letterman sweater, which is what we actually had, wouldn't resonate in the same way. So I had that. Gotcha. That's the only Harvard Letterman jacket that exists. So it was. So the Ivy League was never really on my radar growing up. In Arlington Heights. There was like one kid a year back in the 90s who would go and didn't really understand what that meant. But I started getting recruited by the Ivy League schools along with some lower level D1 schools. And it was actually Bruce Glover, the head football coach at that time, who made one statement to me that stuck that had me go to Harvard. And it was, I was choosing between Harvard and some like opportunities to go take visits like Northern Illinois and Bowling Green. And it was like, based on my experience coaching a couple other guys who went Ivy League, Harvard invites you to go there, you don't turn them down. And it sort of just like that made sense to me. I realized what Harvard really meant in the world. But then going there from Arlington Heights was a culture shock because there were, a good percentage of the students, there is a wealth there that I had never seen before. And so, while I, had, ate every meal in the dorm and didn't take trips and all this stuff, there was this group of kids who would always eat out and be flying off on private jets to here and there. And when they talked about this stuff, they had a way of making you feel small. It was just an experience and this sort of, I don't know how to describe it, but you weren't part of the group, right? There was a certain sector of the population that was very snobby and made you feel, and if you weren't part of their culture, they made you feel small. And so that was an idea that sort of became Chris Harvard for me. That because the public doesn't know what people are really like, and obviously there's a wide swath of people at the school from all different experiences, all that. But you could play off the idea that everybody was a silver spoon kid, and so I became the silver spoon kid who would say things that tried to make people feel bad about themselves. And I even used chants I'd heard in high school. Even putting in retrospect, like I remember we'll get to the Elite Eight, but in the Elite Eight, one of the richer suburban schools chanting to like a city school, $5, $10, $15, we own the company, you'll drive the trucks. And I didn't appreciate just, how absurdly insulting that was, but that was the kind of things I would say to the crowd. And it worked. They hated me. And so, and it really was that sociological understanding of class and culture that helped me appreciate why that character would resonate with people. And then, and the physical side to that, football was where I got most of my brain trauma. Like you can't play football without getting hit in the head hundreds of times a season. And if I think back now to the research we do, in high school, there were most of my career, I never left the field. I played both ways in every special team. And so we're talking, I was probably taking over 2,000 inches ahead of season, depending on how hard we were practicing. And that adds up over time. I don't remember a lot of concussions. I remember giving some. I remember sending people away on stretchers because I intentionally hit them with my helmet, not knowing any better, and that it wasn't flagged back then.
Right.
And then in wrestling, the idea is you're not supposed to hit each other in the head. It's supposed to be, performance. But I was in there at a time where there was a lot of pressure to make it look real. It was there was a rivalry among three companies, and one of the companies had a reputation for being hardcore, and that meant you don't put your hands up on chair shots, you don't do certain things. And so I got in sort of at a dangerous time where people were taking risks that hadn't been taken before in wrestling in the mainstream.
Totally.
It added up. So.
And I remember kind of like that. I think it might have been a particular episode of Tough Enough, and I think only nuanced wrestling fans will understand this. When Mick Foley comes, he was like the pioneer of like method wrestling, where he had the pins in his back when he fell from the ceiling and stuff like that. And everyone looked at that as a badge of honor, when really it's potentially probably psychotic behavior.
Well, he said he regrets it.
Right.
He's been public saying he beat up his body in ways that he couldn't understand, and now the chronic pain and the brain issues are not worth it.
Right. And I think that was kind of the magnetism of Tough Enough as a show, is it provided you, an insight and a look into man, this is real athleticism, and it's real pain and real trauma and real violence. I mean, it might be a storyline that's created or a persona that's created, but these guys are taking real falls, and these are real chairs made with real iron,
Yeah. I mean, it's a fine line between a safe performance, which it should be, and a near-death experience, which it too often was, and sometimes still can be. But I never thought I'd be on a reality television show, but at that point, I'd made the choice to try to make it to the top in wrestling because I got bored with a healthcare consulting job I'd taken out of college. And so I was going to night school at Killer Kowalski's nights and weekends while working, and just kept taking steps forward. The opportunity for the show came up. I sent in a tape. They recognized having a Harvard guy on a wrestling reality show made sense. And then they edited me actually to be the bad guy. So in real life, I never been a bad guy, but I really disliked a lot of the people in the house, and that came through. And so it was, in wrestling, you got to be a good guy or a bad guy. And I think they realized early on, and Chris Harvard actually came from the idea that there were two Chris's on the show, and it got really confusing who was who. And so the producers in week 3 said, only refer to him as Chris Harvard. and again, when you're Chris Harvard, you're going to be a bad guy.
Right.
And so that was it was very exciting. And it was actually, Hersey Theater that got me into that, right? I did theater. I did West Side Story my senior year, spring musical, and it got me comfortable with acting.
Oh, wow. That's got to be an anecdote. I might have to add that to the Wikipedia page myself. That's an anecdote people don't know. I'm sure Mr. Marquette would be thrilled to have that on the Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. During the publication of Head Games, you investigated the deaths of former pro athletes Andre Waters, Justin Strelchik, Ted Johnson, and Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit, probably the highest profile of those.
Ted Johnson's still alive, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't it?
Of course, the findings gathered in these studies, alongside the research of pathologist Bennett Amahu, served as watershed moments in the widespread awareness of CTE and its acceleration of brain illnesses like dementia. Of course, harrowing work, for you and for the families, of course. And perhaps this is an understated question that has an answer that could take a great deal of time to unravel. But in simple terms, how does CTE and head trauma scientifically act as an accelerant, to negatively impact the brain?
So chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CT, is a disease we've always known about in our culture as punch drunk. We always knew boxers who get punched in the head all day end up with cognitive problems, speech problems, movement disorders, being loopy. And we never really connected the dots to other sports. And so now we've been studying it in other sports. And so we realized that essentially repetitive trauma to the brain, and it isn't just one hit, because everybody gets a concussion and very, very few people get this disease. But those who do usually have thousands and thousands of hits in their history. There's a small percentage of the population that does crazy things, right? And you basically get these lesions in your brain around blood vessels at the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex of the brain, right here, which is a very sensitive area to trauma when you're twisting your head left and right. At the depths of the valleys of the brain, the sulcus, you have these hills and valleys of your brain. The bottom of the valley is called the sulcus, and that's really where the stress of an impact goes. So your brain rapidly twists. The stress down at the bottom of the sulcus is causing pulling of axons and causing the cells around blood vessels to somehow get damaged, so your blood vessels become leaky. And essentially this process that starts as microscopic around tiny vessels spreads over time. You start damaging cells, and the cells slowly die, and over the rest of your life, if you spark this disease, and usually in multiple places of the brain, including deep areas of the brainstem, it'll just kill cells, and over time, your brain is no longer can be resilient to the damage, and you start to have symptoms. And the symptoms are cognitive, they can be emotional, they can be behavioral, and yeah, it's something to do with the lot of hits in a short period of time.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll add though, there's another Hersey reference. Is what made my entrance into this specialty. I'm not a neuropathologist. I don't go into the labs. But what was lacking back in 2006 when I started conducting outreach to families was that the only players that were dying were players who came to autopsy. And what Dr. Malo did was study the two Steelers who came to the Allegheny County Medical Examiner's office. And they died, years apart. And at that pace, we'd never have answers. And what I said is, we need answers faster. And so I started calling families when people died, and I still do. And I'm actually working on a case today. And it was when I had to call Andre Waters' family as my first brain, because the medical examiner refused to do the study, but said if I get family's permission, he would allow it. And and the doctor would make the call. He was like, I'm not calling the family. I'm not comfortable with it. You make the call or this isn't happening. Yeah, it's a tough call. And there was a history teacher at Hersey back in the day named Mr. Nitz. And big dude, 6'10", big voice, big personality. And we always played college bowl at the end of chapters. We'd do a little competition. And whenever you'd have to, it's like Jeopardy, you had to name points. And every time you undershot your bet, you would say, "Wow, God hates a coward." You had to bet more. And you got that phrase, "God hates a coward," like stuck in my head, and still does. And so when I remember when I was choosing whether or not to make that call, I was like, God hates a coward. Let's go. Let's do this. So it was a little bit of a little Hersey inspiration.
Absolutely. Because of your work, you've been named to like a laundry list of 40 under 40, like most powerful people in sports because of your impact on contact sports like hockey and football, and have been met with great acclaim by health leaders as like a progressive ideologist in this field. And if you could outline what initiatives you would like to see football, hockey, and other contact sports, or even the military adopt now, and what future safety measures would you like to see enacted over the course of the next 5 to 10 years? Because, personally, following you on Twitter and watching college football on Saturdays and Sundays, it's always that perspective that you bring to light after something happens on the field that maybe an announcer or players on the field celebrate. And then you're kind of the dose of reality behind it, which is an interesting perspective that I enjoy, watching kind of, what you're looking for as a behavioral scientist and somebody who is an expert in this field based with what, is glorified or magnified by the defensive coordinator or the players themselves or the announcers who are broadcasting the game. So what do you think immediately versus what do you think could be implemented over the next 5 to 10 years to football at the highest level, or football even at, the Pop Warner or Pee Wee level?
Yeah, we just need a new look at, how we play sports that starts with why we play sports. right? So we need to, and my experience at WB helped me appreciate like the professional stuff is strictly about entertainment and money, right? And it's not pure sport. It's not for health. It's for money. And so that you have to treat those differently than you treat everybody else. And so, the pro level, we're talking about taking care of retired players, but we're also talking about negotiating the level of safety that everyone's comfortable with, right? The idea of informed consent. You can do a dangerous job if you want to. You can be a firefighter, you can be a cop, you can go to war as part of the military. But so if you want to go play football to feed your family, that's fine with me, right? But the question is it are you informed about the risks, and are you doing the right things? And so we've been advisors of the NFL Player Association for years, and all these reforms we've seen at the NFL level over the last 10 years have been driven by the players who became aware of the risks and said, I don't need to take that risk. It's not going to affect the quality of the game on Sunday. We don't need the hits to the head. We don't need the hits in practice. So that's, we need, the players to have a voice and safety when basically they're 18 years or older. And then when we talk about the young people, we talk about minors, we don't let minors do a lot of things. We don't let them sign legal contracts. We don't let them, drink, smoke, serve in the military, all these things, because we know they don't really understand the risks that they're at. No matter how smart they are, there's a maturity that comes with brain development and the appreciation of long-term consequences. And so the idea that we're letting kids play a sport that are giving them a degenerative brain disease before they're old enough to understand what a degenerative brain disease is ethically problematic. And so what I'm trying to get people to realize is that nobody should be getting brain diseases from playing sports as kids. And that means we have to stop hitting kids in the head so dang much. Like the idea that, again, like when I played in high school, was taking 2,000 hits in the head a season, like that's not a good idea. And there's nothing that's really worth it. So what can we do to change that? And that means we're pushing for like a no hitting kids in the head world until at least 14. Until at least high school, the idea that you're tackling anybody to the ground, or the idea that you're heading soccer balls, as a neuroscientist, is insanity. And as a sports person, it's insanity. Those aren't skills that you need to develop before you even can get in the weight room. And this is I think the easiest way to understand it. Like you're not inviting elementary school kids to the weight room to go lift, because we're actually all aware that that's probably a bad idea for their joint development. Right? So the idea that we take those same kids and we go bash them in the head, not appreciating that we know it's bad for their brain development, is absurd. So don't hit kids in the head, have flag versions, tag versions, just change the rules for kids. And at the high school level, we need to have, continued aggressive discussions about reducing brain trauma and not doing dangerous things. So that means in practice, you're not hitting anymore except for the minimal amount to play safely. And then in the games, you're being much more conscious of how people play, flagging dangerous hits, how many, that the two-way player only still exists in high school. And that's something that we have to think about, even though I love doing it and it's fun and awesome. It's a lot of hits to the head. But if we got rid of the ones in practice, maybe it would be okay. So hockey, that means no checking until, high school. It's right now no check until 13. It'll be no check until 15 soon as we continue to accumulate evidence. But and then on the concussion side, it's educate everybody, make sure there are medical resources available to actually diagnose concussions and manage them properly. And let's try to minimize the number of concussions that are happening and make sure everyone's taken care of. It's not that complicated. It's all doable.
And I think, what 2020 has taught us is, I think, like sports purists in a lot of sense, who are afraid of seeing headers go from soccer or, hitting go from Pop Warner football will adjust. If 2020 taught us anything, it's that people will adjust by necessity, if they have to. And then, 5-10 years, we'll remember, hitting as sixth graders to be like leather helmets. It's just, it has to be, it has to be, instituted at the right time, which makes a ton of sense, even from a logical perspective.
Yep.
So you spoke in detail on a CBS News segment about the symptoms of your own post-concussion syndrome, and you alluded to that a little bit earlier with lingering headaches, nausea when your heart rate increased, sleepwalking. As someone has suffered concussions as a college athlete myself, along with many others who have also suffered from a concussion, what should we be looking out for to help manage and properly treat our brains, knowing that we've had injuries like this? You know, I'm sure I'm not the only one who had, you know, a concussion or multiple concussions, as you alluded to earlier as well. Like, we might not know how many concussions we've had after a career in sports.
No, and it's when you play the full-time contact sports like football, rugby, ice hockey, like the count of the concussions in my mind with the research is somewhat meaningless, because it really is a subjective count, right? Like, what do you consider to be a concussion? There's lots of people who are still saying what we call a ding, which might be a hit to the head where you're just off for a few minutes and then it comes back. Like, that's still a concussion by definition. But we don't count those in our total. We only count the ones where a doctor says you got a concussion, you got to take time off. And the research is very clear that we withhold all the more minor symptoms, but the symptoms don't correlate with the severity of the injury, because, you know, it all depends on like sort of what part of your brain is malfunctioning. And what could be a more severe microscopic brain injury might be in a part of the brain that doesn't prevent you from continuing to play, right? If your vision or balance is impaired, you might stop. But if you just have a headache, or, you know, some other part of your brain is impaired, you might keep playing. So the way we talk about like long-term prospects is if you just had a concussion or two over your years, like the correlation with bad outcomes is modest. Like, you know, you might have a slightly higher risk of some you know, issues down the road, but it's not something you should, you know, I think focus on. There's a lot of other ways that things could go bad for you that you can pay attention to. Totally. We do talk a lot about focusing on brain health, heart health. You know, vascular brain disease is a big issue, a variable that you can control. So blood pressure, you know, weight, obesity, diet, all that stuff. Even if you have a history of trauma, this will improve your outcomes. So we talk about things positively. And then if you do have any lingering symptoms you're concerned about, get treatment for them, because that treatment now exists. We talk about rehabilitation. We didn't 10 years ago. So get, you know, if you have any of these symptoms, take depression, anxiety, get treatment no matter what the cause is. You have, you know, chronic headaches, or you have, you know, deficits, balance deficits, or vision issues, you think like it could be related to concussions long-term, go to a concussion clinic, get evaluated. We have a helpline that you can always refer to us, Google CLF helpline, and we'll find you somebody in the area. There's a lot of great people in the area. So, and then if you're part of that group that's had thousands and thousands of hits to the head, that is a group where you have to be conscious of the fact that if behavioral changes start to show up in 30s, 40s, 50s, cognitive changes in usually, you know, 40s, 50s, 60s, that could be related to CTE or some degenerative process. And again, I would say reach out to us. We've got some great doctors, and try to treat the symptoms, stay on top of them. You know, this stuff can tear families apart. You know, I mean, like, I've helped out former teammates of mine already from Hersey. Recently was helping out a guy I played against from another local high school, like where they're just telltale sort of CT signs, you know, causing real strife with the family. And it's a real thing. But the important thing is you can't get treatment. That it doesn't mean you're going to suddenly go over a roller coaster, you know, top of a roller coaster and downhill. Usually, if you can manage it, you stay steady state for a long, long time. You don't have to die young. You don't have to, you know, go into a spiral. But you got to do the medical management.
Totally. And then, you know, you alluded to this just in that last response. At the center of the discussion of the 21st century student in education lie the issues of anxiety and depression and how they affect one's schoolwork, but also their concept of themselves. As a behavioral neuroscientist, what would you like to see done in the modern school to accommodate for these growing trends in students? Especially after a semester of remote learning.
No, it's tough. Look, I'm sure you've had fewer concussions though over in the school, because right. You know, there's been much sports. But man, you know, like I consider myself very lucky to get hurt in my 20s, where I could just disappear from the world and recover. And no one was expecting me to show up every day and, you know, compete with my peers for the, you know, grades in the future and then have a social life and all these things. I just disappeared. So it's really hard to be struggling with a concussion in high school. And this is a big area of focus for the organization, because when we started this, like, schools were not aware, they were not competent. They did not understand that when you have a brain injury, you cannot, you know, go through school in the same way, because you might have cognitive impairments, memory impairments, physical symptoms that prevent you from learning, prevent you from being able to be in a classroom comfortably. So the state of Illinois is pretty good. You know, there are requirements by law now for public high schools to have a school policy for return to the classroom. And so the idea is basically, you get a concussion, you take, you know, 24 to 48 hours to rest, and then you start to try to integrate back in, and the school accommodates what you're going through. So they, you know, they'll let you longer for tests or delayed tests, and you don't necessarily have to make it all up if you fall behind, like because the pressure to stay up makes things much, much worse. And it's really about getting through that month, 2 months, 3 months without having things go off the rails. And they can go off the rails emotionally and psychologically. So it's give accommodations. You know, there's a lot of people, you know, and we've struggled with this a lot in the private school world, where they think kids are just trying to get out of stuff. And there's an assumption that every kid's lying. And it's, you know, it's really not the case. There's going to be a kid here that tries to abuse it, but they're usually very easy to pick up. You know, they might, you know, maybe for one test, who cares if you get it wrong, but they get it away, right? The idea is you got to believe these kids, because it's an invisible injury, and it takes a lot of guts to speak up and say you're not feeling it. So get, you know, I'm sure you guys are great there. Work the school nurse, work, you know, develop those accommodations, ease off them over time. You know, maybe they go pass fail, maybe, you know, whatever it is. Don't let that concussion define their high school career, right? It's just a blip that we have to respect and manage. And then look out for those emotional problems. You mentioned, you know, students dying by suicide. The Happiness Project, like, this happens with concussion. Like, people can't deal with the chronic symptoms, they can't deal with the pressure. And again, their brain's not functioning, and so they make permanent choices where they just need a temporary solution. And so be on the lookout for those kids who get depressed and have anxiety issues, because, you know, again, you're in pain, you're falling behind, you're losing you lose your social network, you might be losing your passion for it, and it's really hard when you're, you know, a teenager to deal with.
Totally. Speaking of being a teenager, in 1995, you were a member of the Hersey basketball team that reached the Elite Eight, the furthest advancement in Hersey basketball history, where you guys lost to the eventual state champion Peoria Manual Rams, one of the better teams in Illinois high school basketball history. So describe to us a little bit about what being on that team was like, and playing for a young Coach Rowley at that time.
I don't think he was young even back then.
What were some of your favorite memories or moments from that team, and, you know, from your senior year in '96 as well? What do you remember most when reminded of that time?
Yeah, I mean, my basketball experience at Hersey was awesome. You know, that Coach Novak there too, who sadly is retiring. So it was. I just remember just being a really special group of guys. You know, that '95 team. It was a different group of guys. You know, in the sense that it was very laid back. They were, you know, the senior group was good friends, but they were also very welcoming to me and Mike, or two juniors in the rotation, Mike White. I mean, there was no superstar in that team, in the sense that, like, guys didn't go on to play big time college ball. It was just like, you know, they referred to as a Cinderella story, and we really were. It was just a team that played together really well, hustled really well, was coached really well, was very aggressive. Yeah, but, you know, like, you don't remember the games. Like, remember the little things. Like, we used to, like, to relax before games. Like, it wasn't like we were all hyped up. The guys would sing oldies songs in the locker room, the group, like, and like doo-wop stuff. And it was just sort of, it was a very interesting culture, very relaxed culture, a lot of laughs, a lot of fun. And then we just went out and took care of business on the court, and learned over the season that we were good. We didn't really know that going in.
Yeah, and there are some, you know, in picking up from Coach Rowley, he gave me a VHS of, like, the 1995 highlight tape that I think Jason McKinney, who's now
McKinney, yeah, I was gonna say, I remember McKinney putting it together. I remember sitting on his couch, on his chair, talking about block shots for that video.
Yes.
And that's what I remember.
I'll tell you what, Chris. Like it's on YouTube now.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, you should go back and watch it. Some of your individual cameos are absolutely hilarious. And I can share the link with you. But like you said, sitting on that couch talking about your role as a shot blocker is one of my. You could see the seeds of the Chris Harvard.
Yeah, exactly.
It's excellent. And there's so many good cameos of you guys just like riding in the van and champagne and things like that.
Yeah.
I will send you
I'll remember more from the video than I do off the top of my head because I concussed.
It's too funny. It's too funny. So.
Yeah. But yeah, let's not gloss over 9 block shots in one game.
I think Fabrizius might have broke the record, but that's got to be.
I know it's not on any walls or anything, but at the time it was very good.
So you graduated in '96, and our current assistant coach and ARC media assistant Mike White is from that graduating class as well. Now, Coach White at Hersey today, he's Joe Cool. He's got the bald head and the perfectly manicured goatee and the new jeans to go along with it. What was he like in high school? In other words, is he always as cool and composed and as kind of the center of the story as he is now, or what was the development of that persona? I
don't think Mike has changed or aged in the last 24 years. That's exactly how he looked. He was my we were inseparable in those days. But Mike was the king of the school. He was homecoming king. I remember him. He was. He was. They still have Mr. Husky.
No.
That's inappropriate for this day and age.
Male pageant, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there was a male pageant where I dressed up as a woman for him. We did a rap thing because everyone loved him, and it was those just the fond memories. No, Mike White is a treasure. I think it's great that he's still at Hersey because he's his own Hersey institution.
Right.
It's
like you said, he doesn't age. It's the same.
He does
throughout the years.
He doesn't age. He's got a great level head. So he's a good mentor for young people. He cares. He didn't have a lot of breaks early on, and has accomplished a lot. And he's a generally nice guy who cares about people. So, so I think it's fantastic that he's landed at Hersey, and I hope he stays there forever because I think he's the kind of person you want around young people.
Totally. And then,
they still dunk?
You know what? I know he can't make threes, and he'll kill me for
he could never make threes. Okay, go back to the statistics.
He'll get his lefty jump shot out and fire away, and the kids are like, "Do these ever go in?" But I bet.
Does he ever pass into the post anymore? Because he didn't do it back then either.
I think he could probably still get up and dunk. I don't think he's probably tried in 10 years, but knowing him, and like one of the things that also stays with him is like his athleticism. Like, it doesn't really go away. And he's actually, I think, more proud of his high jump accomplishments than even basketball. Like he likes to show the picture there's like a screen at Hersey that has like all conference and all area. And like, for some reason, his track photo is an action shot of him like jumping over like whatever, a 9-foot bar.
I remember that picture. Yeah.
Completely airborne. So that's the one that he likes to show, because it's like muscles bulging and he's flying through the air like some Hersey high school version of, Air Jordan. But that's the one he likes to point to.
Surprised he doesn't have it tattooed.
I bet he could get up there and throw it down still. So as someone who has exhaustively studied and researched and wrote and spoke on myriad panels and platforms, what advice would you give a student who is perhaps undecided on, their vocation or their career path and is still searching for their passion to pursue, at the college level or beyond? In referencing our first question where you talked about your own ignition moment happening, at a later time, what would you tell, a high school student who's maybe planning on attending college but doesn't know where that avenue could lead?
Yeah. So my answer is there's really nothing wrong with not knowing what you want to do at that age. Because I didn't. But I remember I spent a lot of time on it. There was a class at the time on helping you with sort of like, I forget what it's called, but you explored careers. It was maybe called career exploration, trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do. And all the tests that I wanted to be in marketing or advertising. But I also thought, I think I wanted to be creative, but I also didn't want to just be pushing soda or something. So the way I not knowing what I wanted to be, not knowing I definitely want to be a doctor, I definitely want to be a lawyer, I definitely want to be a programmer, whatever it is. I just decided that I would just pick up as many skills as I could and work hard at everything. So I'd be prepared for when that spark came, that I'd have options, right? That I could do it. And so if you think about what I'm doing now, a lot of those seeds are planted from I remember the classes at Hersey. So I took the AP science classes there. I never think I'd become a scientist, right? I sort of abandoned science in college, but I laid the groundwork to get back to it in high school. I loved English. I remember teachers like Mr. Benigoni, Mr. Bolito, and I never thought I'd write a book. I was never that great of an English student, but I worked hard at it, right? And the theater stuff, I did pick up some of that in college, so I sort of did a lot of different things. And even going back to the marketing advertising stuff, so now I do that as part of our job. We create public service announcements, and I sort of lead some of the creative discussions, and we just won a Clio Award, which is the top award in advertising, for a 30-second PSA we had where we had little kids playing football and smoking cigarettes at the same time with their parents lighting their cigarettes, trying to help people appreciate they're both bad ideas for kids. So it's the simple advice is it's okay not to know what you want to do. Hopefully you won't have to get kicked in the head to figure out your life path. But I would say just leave all these options open and try to be good at everything you have a chance to, especially I was a liberal arts curriculum in college, right? I studied sociology, which helped not only inform my wrestling character, but helped me appreciate the concussion issue was less a medical problem than a cultural problem, right? The science was already there. It was that no one wanted to acknowledge it, So just do everything that's interesting to you in the moment. Pursue it like crazy. Learn like heck. Try out a million different things. Be okay with failing. And if you do all that and you work hard and you build all these skills, you'll find you'll find that opportunity to take advantage of that when you can strike. And that's sort of, I think, has been my path, that I was able to take advantage of all these small skills I built up over time to end up leading a nonprofit, and have certain talents and certain things that were laid way in the past.
I love it. That's excellent advice, for this class of 2021 and then beyond. Dr. Chris Nowinski, thank you so much for joining us. Subscribe to @HerseyHoops on Twitter or Instagram for live episodes of the network, which can also be found on YouTube, Spotify, or SoundCloud. Thanks again, Chris. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure, Scott. Great to remember all the good times at Hersey.
Check it out. Hit you with no delaying, so what you saying, yo? Silly with your ice grilly with the dilly, yo. When I be on the mic, yes, I do my duty, yo. While up in the club like we while in the studio. You know when to violate, baby, really and truly, yo. My main thug, Bill and Julio, he moody, yo. Type of